This is me, July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33 Mountain Time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible.
On a freezing December night in 2009, 28-year-old Susan Cox Powell, a devoted mother of two, vanished from her West Valley City home in Utah. Her husband, Josh Powell, claimed innocence, weaving a bizarre story that only deepened the mystery. As investigators unraveled the details, they uncovered a disturbing web of secrets, lies, and unimaginable betrayal. The case would end in tragedy, leaving a nation horrified and demanding answers to one haunting question. What happened to Susan Cox Powell? Susan Cox Powell was a young, vibrant woman with a promising future. Born on October 16, 1981, she grew up in a loving family in Puyallup, Washington, with strong ties to her faith in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS. Susan was described by friends and family as kind-hearted, hard-working, and devoted to her family. In 2001, Susan met Josh Powell, a fellow member of the LDS Church, through a church function. Josh, initially charming and ambitious, swept Susan off her feet. The couple married just a year later.
You belong to somebody new, but tonight you belong to me.
And moved to West Valley City, Utah, where they started their family. Susan worked as a cosmetologist, while Josh explored various entrepreneurial ventures, though he struggled to hold steady employment. The couple welcomed two sons, Charlie and Braden, who quickly became the center of Susan's world. However, behind the facade of a happy family life, cracks in their relationship began to show. Josh exhibited controlling and manipulative behavior, often isolating Susan from her friends and family. He exerted control over their finances, accumulating significant debt, despite Susan's efforts to manage their household responsibly. Friends noticed Susan becoming increasingly withdrawn, her once cheerful demeanor replaced by stress and worry. Compounding these marital issues was Josh's unusual relationship with his father, Stephen Powell. Stephen harbored an unsettling obsession with Susan, openly expressing inappropriate thoughts about her. He even went so far as to secretly record videos of her and steal personal items.
Just had what is probably the most erotic experience I've had in my entire life. I just hate to say it, I mean, of course, because I haven't had that many experiences, but Susan has been feeling ill. She had a cold, and I offered to rub her feet, to rub her toes, to give her some stimulation. That went on. I probably rubbed her feet, her toes, her beautiful feet. She has such pretty feet. Of course, everything about her is pretty, beautiful. And I know she felt it. I mean, I know she couldn't have missed it. She's not naive either, I know, from what I've read in her journals. That girl is not naive. When I started massaging her legs, I would have loved to go all the way up her legs, but I did do her calves because her feet were resting in my crotch, so I sort of rubbed her calves. She didn't seem to mind at all having me that close. I mean, I was close. I was touching her with my crotch.
Susan confided in friends about her discomfort around her father-in-law, adding to the strain in her marriage. By 2009, Susan's unhappiness in her marriage had reached a breaking point. She began documenting her concerns in journals and even created a video will, stating, "If something happens to me, it may not be an accident." Susan's loved ones believed she was planning to leave Josh, a decision that would have significant consequences. On the morning of December 7, 2009, Susan Cox Powell was reported missing under suspicious circumstances. Her husband, Josh Powell, offered a story that only deepened investigators' doubts. Josh claimed that on the evening of December 6th, he spontaneously decided to take their two young sons, Charlie and Braden, on a late-night camping trip to Simpson Springs, a remote desert location. He said Susan had chosen to stay home because she was tired. According to Josh, they left around midnight, despite the freezing temperatures, and when they returned the following day, Susan was gone. Josh's account raised immediate suspicions. The idea of taking two small children camping in the middle of a frigid night seemed implausible. Even more troubling, Josh displayed little concern for Susan's disappearance, failing to notify authorities or reach out to family members to ask if they had seen her. His behavior did not align with that of a worried husband. When investigators entered the Powell home, they found troubling evidence. A wet spot on the carpet had been cleaned and was drying under fans. But Josh offered no satisfactory explanation for what had spilled. Susan's purse, wallet, and phone were still in the house, clear signs that she hadn't left voluntarily. As detectives began to question Josh, more alarming details surfaced. During an interview, his young son, Charlie, made a chilling remark. He said his mother had gone on the camping trip with them but had not returned. Charlie also mentioned that Susan had been in the trunk, a statement that hinted at something far more sinister. Meanwhile, Josh's actions following Susan's disappearance only added to the suspicion. He rented a car and drove hundreds of miles over the next 2 days without providing any explanation for where he had gone. He also liquidated Susan's retirement accounts and canceled her upcoming medical appointments, as though he didn't expect her to return. Authorities searched Simpson Springs but found no evidence to support Josh's claims. No campsite, no personal belongings, and no traces of Susan were uncovered. The investigation now centered on Josh, whose inconsistent behavior and implausible story made him the primary suspect. However, without Susan's body or direct evidence tying him to her disappearance, investigators were left grappling with unanswered questions. As investigators delved deeper into Susan's disappearance, the Powell family's dark secrets began to surface. Josh Powell's erratic behavior and the chilling remarks from his son Charlie already pointed to foul play, but further inquiries revealed a deeply disturbing pattern of control, obsession, and manipulation that extended beyond Josh himself. The investigation also brought attention to Josh's father, Stephen Powell, whose behavior added another layer of unease. Stephen Powell harbored a disturbing obsession with Susan, which he documented in diaries, photographs, and videos. These included voyeuristic images of Susan taken without her knowledge and explicit writings about his infatuation with her. Susan had been aware of Stephen's behavior and found it deeply unsettling, further straining her already fragile marriage to Josh. As investigators worked to uncover evidence tying Josh to Susan's disappearance, they discovered that Susan had been taking steps to protect herself. She had recorded a video inventory of her home's belongings, documenting her fears in case anything happened to her. In one recording, she directly stated that if she were ever harmed, it would not be an accident. This chilling foresight painted a clear picture of the danger she felt in her own home. Josh's actions in the weeks following Susan's disappearance only deepened suspicions. In addition to withdrawing money from her retirement account, he moved out of their family home and returned to Puyallup, Washington, taking Charlie and Braden with him. This sudden relocation raised alarm bells among investigators, who feared he was attempting to evade scrutiny. Despite mounting circumstantial evidence, law enforcement faced a major obstacle. Without Susan's body or direct forensic evidence, they lacked the critical proof needed to arrest Josh. In 2011, a breakthrough came when investigators searched Stephen Powell's home in connection with a separate case involving voyeurism. During the search, they found extensive evidence of Stephen's obsession with Susan, including the disturbing videos and journals. Stephen was arrested and later convicted on charges of voyeurism and child pornography. While the discovery confirmed the toxic environment Susan had endured, it also underscored the difficulty of tying her disappearance to Josh. After the arrest and conviction of Stephen Powell, authorities determined that the Powell family home in Puyallup, Washington, was an unsafe environment for Charlie and Braden. The children were removed from Josh Powell's custody and placed temporarily with Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, in Washington State. This marked the beginning of an emotionally charged and complex custody battle that would expose systemic failures and ultimately end in tragedy. Josh Powell, despite being the primary suspect in Susan's disappearance, fought aggressively to regain custody of his two sons. He portrayed himself as a loving and attentive father, denying any involvement in Susan's disappearance and arguing that the charges against his father, Stephen Powell, had no bearing on his own ability to parent. In court, Josh emphasized his legal rights as the children's biological father, leveraging sympathy and procedural limitations to bolster his case. Josh's public image was carefully curated during the custody battle. He gave interviews, projecting an image of a devoted father unfairly maligned by the Cox family and law enforcement. However, behind the scenes, his behavior remained erratic and troubling. His refusal to cooperate with investigators searching for Susan, combined with his growing hostility toward the Cox family, painted a starkly different picture. Living with Chuck and Judy Cox provided Charlie and Braden with a safe and nurturing environment where they began to open up about their experiences. Their statements raised alarms. Charlie mentioned that his mother had been on the camping trip with them but hadn't come back. He later told his grandparents that "Mommy is in the mines," a statement investigators believed could refer to a burial site. The boys drew disturbing pictures that suggested they had witnessed traumatic events. Their drawings often depicted their family in ominous scenarios, raising concerns about what they might have seen the night Susan disappeared. The Cox family believed the children's remarks were crucial evidence, not only in the custody battle, but also in the criminal investigation into Susan's disappearance. However, legal limitations on using children's statements in custody cases made it difficult to sway the court's decisions. The custody hearings were contentious. On one side, the Cox family, supported by law enforcement, argued that Josh Powell's involvement in Susan's disappearance, coupled with his father's crimes, made him an unfit parent. On the other, Josh's legal team framed the battle as a smear campaign, asserting that there was no direct evidence of Josh posing a danger to his sons. Key points during the proceedings included: 1. Josh's refusal to cooperate, his unwillingness to undergo a psychosexual evaluation, a court-mandated assessment to determine his fitness as a parent, raised serious concerns. 2. Financial instability. Despite Susan's disappearance, Josh had continued to liquidate her retirement accounts, a move seen as self-serving and indicative of a lack of concern for her well-being. 3. Stephen Powell's influence. Evidence of Stephen's disturbing behavior, including his obsession with Susan, highlighted the toxic environment in which Josh had raised his sons. Despite these red flags, the court struggled with the absence of definitive proof linking Josh to Susan's disappearance. Judges hesitated to fully terminate his parental rights, citing procedural fairness and the lack of formal charges against him. In January 2012, the court allowed Josh Powell to have supervised visitation rights with Charlie and Braden. These visits were to take place at Josh's rented home in Graham, Washington, under the supervision of a state-appointed social worker. While this decision was intended to strike a balance between Josh's parental rights and the children's safety, it drew sharp criticism from the Cox family and law enforcement. Chuck and Judy Cox expressed grave concerns about the visits, fearing that Josh might harm the children. They believed that the court had underestimated Josh's capacity for violence and manipulation. Investigators echoed these fears, warning that Josh's behavior during the investigation into Susan's disappearance demonstrated a willingness to act deceitfully and erratically. Despite these warning signs, Josh continued to attend supervised visits with his sons, maintaining an appearance of normalcy. The social worker assigned to oversee the visits reported no immediate concerns, though she was unaware of the full extent of Josh's actions behind closed doors. In the morning of February 5, 2012, a state-appointed social worker arrived at Josh Powell's rented home in Graham, Washington, to supervise a scheduled visitation between Josh and his sons. What began as a routine visit would escalate into a premeditated act of murder-suicide that shocked the nation. In the weeks preceding the incident, Josh Powell exhibited alarming behavior that foreshadowed his desperate plan. He withdrew large sums of cash from his bank account, stopped communicating with friends, and sent cryptic goodbye emails to family members. In these messages, he expressed feelings of hopelessness and defeat, signaling his intent to end his life and take his sons with him. On the day of the explosion, Josh made no attempt to conceal his plans. He donated his children's toys and books to charity, clearing out the remnants of their young lives. He sent emails to his attorney and family with phrases like, "I'm sorry, goodbye." He left voicemails for loved ones, making vague but ominous remarks about their future. Despite these clear warning signs, no intervention occurred before the scheduled visitation. When the social worker arrived at Josh's home that morning, Charlie and Braden excitedly ran ahead to the door. Josh opened it, ushered the boys inside, and then slammed the door shut, locking the social worker outside. She banged on the door and repeatedly called for Josh to let her in, but there was no response. Recognizing the danger, the worker immediately called 911 to report the situation. The 911 call, later made public, revealed a tragic breakdown in communication between the social worker and emergency dispatch. The dispatcher, uncertain of the jurisdiction and the urgency of the situation, delayed sending help. These precious minutes were all Josh needed to carry out his horrific plan. As authorities pieced together the aftermath, they discovered that Josh had meticulously planned the explosion to ensure no one inside could survive. Investigators later determined the following. Charlie and Braden were attacked with a hatchet. Autopsies revealed severe injuries to the boys, inflicted by Josh in the moments before the explosion. Though the hatchet wounds were not fatal, they underscored his intent to harm his children even before the fire consumed the home. Accelerants were used to ignite the fire. Josh had poured gasoline throughout the house, ensuring the flames would spread rapidly and leave no chance for rescue. Within minutes of locking the social worker out, Josh ignited the accelerants, causing an explosion that engulfed the house in flames. The fire was so intense that first responders could do little more than contain the blaze. By the time firefighters extinguished the flames, the house had been reduced to ashes, and all 3 occupants were dead. The tragic story of Susan Cox Powell and her sons, Charlie and Braden, is a chilling reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked violence, manipulation, and systemic failure. It is a case that exposes how the legal system, despite its intentions to balance parental rights with child safety, can sometimes falter under the weight of insufficient evidence and dangerous assumptions. For years, Susan's disappearance remained shrouded in mystery, with Josh Powell crafting a narrative that kept authorities at bay. His refusal to cooperate with investigators, coupled with the absence of Susan's body, allowed him to avoid criminal charges. However, his escalating desperation and controlling nature ultimately culminated in an act of unfathomable cruelty, the murder of his own children. The deaths of Charlie and Braden Powell were preventable. Their tragedy led to significant changes in child welfare laws, including stricter oversight and prioritization of child safety over the rights of parents under investigation. For Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, the fight for justice did not end with the deaths of their daughter and grandsons. Their advocacy for domestic violence awareness and their efforts to reform the child welfare system have brought much-needed attention to the gaps that contributed to this tragedy. They continue to honor the memory of Susan, Charlie, and Braden by working to ensure that others do not face the same heartbreaking outcomes. The Powell case remains an enduring testament to the darkness that can lurk behind a seemingly normal facade. It raises uncomfortable but necessary questions. How many others live under the shadow of control and abuse, unnoticed until it's too late? And how can society better protect those most vulnerable? What are your thoughts on the Powell case? Do you believe the system failed Susan and her sons? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories.